Ireland is a breathtaking country. Few parts of Europe are as exposed to the forces of nature as is the Emerald Isle, buffeted by the wind and the waves of the North Atlantic. Yet along the rocky shore and inland, amazing sights await us. Atlantic storms hit the rocky shores of Ireland unimpeded. The storms are frequent and rain is plentiful. This rocky island can sometimes look inhospitable and unwelcoming, but it is in fact home to a wealth of thriving animals and plants. Shags make their nests on the steepest of cliffs. All kinds of creatures have found ways to survive and flourish here. A rare breed of sheep does well even in these mountains, where food is far from abundant and the rain and the wind are often intense. Over the centuries, people too have adapted to the weather. As everyone here knows, the weather can change from one moment to the next. When the storm subsides and the skies brighten, the light is magical. And when the tide goes out and the sea is calm, the shore is teeming with life. Algae, sea anemones, clams, snails and crabs all live here along the shore. Suddenly Ireland no longer looks so bleak and bare. In County Sligo on the west coast, Prannie Rhatigan's family has lived beside the ocean and from the ocean for generations. She's a doctor who also loves to cook, with seaweed. At low tide, she goes out to collect what she calls sea vegetables with her husband Johnny and daughter Kate. They're about to prepare a special meal. They cut the fronds carefully and never rip seaweed from the rocks.
I became involved with seaweed through my parents because they were hugely interested in everything that came from the sea. And we grew up just here on the coast in the northwest of Ireland, and it was just the natural thing to do. And my father, he was very interested in, the nutritional side of the seaweeds, so he didn't care that it wasn't fashionable back then to actually go to the sea and harvest. He didn't care about that. He just brought us, and we followed the seasons around.
600 species of seaweed grow along the Irish coast. About 20 are edible. In Ireland, you need a license to harvest it. The right to harvest in perpetuity seaweed from the bay comes with ownership of the old manor house where Prannie and her family live. The biggest pieces are hung up to dry outside on the washing line.
There is a very strong tradition of cooking with seaweed in Ireland, but a lot of it was forgotten. That all really died away, we think, because of the famine, when it became just a necessity and a shameful thing to be scrounging around looking for food at the shore. But thankfully, that is all changing. And people are looking on seaweeds with new eyes. And when I take people out on walks and talks, people suddenly realise, my goodness, there are treasures here in the sea that we never thought that actually existed.
Seaweed is slowly gaining in popularity as a food in Ireland. Prannie Rhatigan has written a seaweed cookbook, and it's a bestseller. Today she's preparing several recipes from the book: savoury scones, 2 salads, a stew, and crunchy seaweed crisps.
Yeah, they're good, aren't they?
Yeah. Of course, there's a yuck factor with many things, but I think once people actually taste the food, suddenly they're transformed. Some of the seaweeds go really well with chocolate. So chocolate cake is, one of those real special treats from the book. The Dulisk and brown bread ice cream. And there's a green tea and nori ice cream. And very many fruit salads and breads and salads, and even Christmas pudding. Our sea spaghetti goes into the Christmas pudding every Christmas.
First, the crisps. Prannie and Kate wash the seaweed and put it in the oven to dry. The washing line method isn't working today, as it started to rain. More than half the people of Ireland live near the sea. There are 3,200 kilometres of coastline, and it comes in all varieties, from craggy and wild to flat and gentle. Living beside the ocean has left its mark on the people, as you can see in Galway, the biggest city on the west coast. This is where the fast-flowing river Corrib meets Galway Bay. This area used to be outside the city walls and was once a proud and independent fishing village, the legendary Claddagh. Most of the small fishing boats have been abandoned and left to rot. No money can be made with them anymore. But the people here still feel deeply attached to the ocean. Their fathers and grandfathers worked hard on the water. The youngsters like to play in it. Everyone here still knows the stories of the olden days in Cladda. Until the 1930s, the fishermen could even dry their nets inside the Dominican Church of St. Mary on the Hill. One of its treasures is a much-loved statue of Our Lady of Galway. The Virgin Mary is often considered a guiding star for seafarers. The mosaic shows a Galway hooker in full sail with the church on the cliff. Once a year, Father Fergal McGonin blesses the bay. It's a very old ritual in Cladda that dates from the time this was a bustling fishing port. A few fishermen still do go out in their boats into the bay. For an hour or two, it's more of a hobby than a way to make a living. They reel in a few mackerel, just enough for a tasty lunch.
Anyone who grows up by the sea has a great respect for it. It's, I don't know, you learn lots of things about it. You know, even the way we can watch the birds and you know what's happening with the weather, from the way the animals are behaving or from the way the sea is changing. You get to understand the sea has moods, it has nuances, it has so much to it, and it's not something you can explain or teach. Most fishermen and most islanders as well are not able to swim. The idea was always that if the sea is going to take you, it's too big to fight it. Don't bother. Go peacefully and go quietly. And whilst it seems very fatalistic, it was also very, very true. And that it also encouraged that if you can't swim and you're in a boat, you're not going to do something stupid. You're not going to take that risk that you shouldn't take. It is only fishing after all.
Mike Mcdonough grew up in Cladda and used to go out to sea every day. He's retired now, but he wants to keep local traditions alive. He's restored this Galway hooker. It's a kind of boat that was created locally to suit the local conditions. On the day of the blessing, the bay will be full of boats.
The blessing of the bay takes place on the 15th of August each year, or the Sunday closest to it, which is the patron saint of the church here. Here we go out on the bay and we have a triple blessing. We bless the boats and all who sail in them. We bless the nets and all that will be caught in them. And we bless the sea. And what it really is a prayer for the safety of those who work at sea and who live at sea and who use the sea. So even though we don't have a large fishing community here anymore, there would still be the interest in locals about having that day where you go out and you pray once on the bay, just for a few minutes, to say, may God keep everyone safe here.
The Galway hooker was developed about 2 centuries ago. It performs well in shallow waters and in rough seas.
It's 82 years old. I have it for 50 years. It was my people's before me, It was used for carrying stuff from here across over to the islands over there, Island Eddy and Town, them areas, back in them days, flour and so on, timber, everything, cement or lime or anything like that, It was because it was easy to transport by sea rather than going by road in them days, as you can imagine.
It's a very practical vessel, broad and stable even in a storm.
It's safe, I think. It's sturdy and it's, it can take weather, it won't go over. I think if that would happen, the mast has to go. The boat won't go, but the wind can break possibly the mast. That's why I have two shrouds on it, see? I have 2 of them on instead of one.
From the Bay of Galway up to the northwest to County Donegal, where it's rough and wild. Tory Island lies 14 kilometers off the coast, out in the Atlantic. It's often cut off when the sea is too rough for the ferry. 150 humans live here, and countless birds. For them, the conditions are excellent. The sun rarely shines, but when it does, the oyster catchers can be seen and heard. They're famous for their piping performances, which are particularly loud when strangers approach their nests. Oyster catchers nest on open, flat ground, but other birds prefer more secluded locations. During their breeding season, from August to April, puffins live in burrows that they dig on steep grassy slopes beside the shore. The burrows can extend 1.5 meters into the earth, so the young are well protected from stormy autumn and winter weather. Such a balmy day is rare on Tory Island. Even the birds appear to enjoy the calm. shags are experts in constructing nests in places that look awfully dangerous. The male delivers the materials, and then he and the female put their home together. The parents bring up their young right on the exposed cliff face. The advantage is, it seems, that their enemies can't reach them. Back on the mainland in County Sligo, Classy-Bourne Castle is a Victorian baronial house built by Lord Palmerston, the British Prime Minister. Like many castles and stately homes in Ireland, it testifies to the centuries of dominion by the English. Ireland's donkeys also have historical ties to the government in London. Their numbers swelled because of the British Empire. In the late 19th century, the cavalry needed lots of horses, so the English rulers ordered a swap, taking 300,000 horses from Ireland in exchange for 300,000 English donkeys. It wasn't a fair deal, but it did have some advantages for the Irish. Donkeys live about twice as long as horses. They're undemanding and suited to hard work in the fields. With the widespread introduction of farm machinery starting in the 1950s, the donkeys became redundant and superfluous. Some are kept as pets, many have been abandoned.
Sadly, people weren't educated on the care of donkeys, and once they were finished their work, they were just shoved to the bottom of the bog and left fend for themselves. And that's where the problems arose. When they were working, they were being looked after and cared for because man needed them. But once they were finished their work, they just got rid of them and shoved them down the field to the bog, as we call it. But these little animals are very tough and resilient, and they lived and lived on. And when they strayed out onto the roads with terribly overgrown feet and hair matted and full of nits and lice and everything, that's where we came in then, because we found them wandering the roads in their thousands and started to rescue them and bring them back here. And then this became the donkey century in Ireland.
Donkeys are believed to have originated in what is now Egypt, Sudan and Somalia, and are adapted to a dry desert climate and stony terrain. They don't like rain, their coats aren't waterproof, and their hooves are not suited to boggy ground. So Ireland is not really the place for donkeys, even though they've been here for centuries. Paddy Barrett and his wife Eileen run a sanctuary for abused or abandoned donkeys. They nurse them back to health and try to find them new homes where they'll be properly looked after.
Donkey's always been a part of kind of Irish folklore and tradition, you know, and pulling the peat from the bogs, the turf as we call it, the peat from, and working on the islands. You know, there was an awful lot of donkeys used to work on the islands down through the years. Still are some donkeys working on islands around the country here, but not as many as they used to be. And believe it's work is good for them, exercise and work is good for the donkeys, you know.
Many donkeys appear to be in good spirits despite the climate. A widespread disease nowadays is laminitis, inflammation of the lamina in the hooves. It can be a metabolic disorder caused by overfeeding with too much starch in the diet. Laminitis is very painful. The patients can hardly move. The sanctuary employs a vet to treat suffering donkeys.
You can see that the hoof bone here is first of all completely deformed. It has been sinking, so this is the line it should have normally. This should be perpendicular to the hoof wall here, as you can see. This is all new bone formation, so that whole foot is more or less deformed. And donkeys can live quite well with this if you take care of their husbandry, so you put them on shavings.
The foot has to be trimmed so that the painful front part has less contact with the ground. And a soft, cushioning booty helps reduce the pressure. The standard therapy also involves a good diet and plenty of patience. Back to Prannie Rhatigan's kitchen beside the sea in County Sligo. Eating seaweed may not have really caught on yet in Ireland, but Prannie is convinced it's a very healthy thing to do, and she is a doctor.
From the nutrition side of things, seaweeds are powerhouses of nutrients. You've got a wonderful mix of minerals, of vitamins, of trace elements, and many other substances that are actually of great benefit, of great health benefit, and that aren't in land vegetables. So our sea vegetables are a lovely mix and have a great synergy with land vegetables and with each other. And I think that's really important for people to know, that you've got a food that's so high in nutrients and yet virtually zero in calories.
First, she makes her famous Dulisk and cheese scones. They're savoury and made with onions. Dulisk is a kind of seaweed common to these parts. It's also known as red dulse.
From a health point of view, I think seaweeds are going to be the next really, really big thing, because we're looking at the research and we're looking at seaweeds from an anti-cancer viewpoint, from the reducing inflammation in the body, from that point of view, and for lowering blood pressure and lowering cholesterol. So I think seaweeds have a lot to offer, and people aren't aware of that. They have a lot to offer for taste, and they have a lot to offer for health. And then a little sprinkling of that.
Before the scones go into the oven, Kate sprinkles cheddar and parmesan on top. Next comes some snack food, crisps made of bladderwrack, a green seaweed with air bladders on the fronds, and red dulse. Kate loves the crisps. They reconciled her with algae cuisine, and they're much healthier than potato crisps.
So, do you want me to raise the last?
Wild nature can also be found away from the coast. Just a short distance inland, there are magnificent landscapes that few tourists come to see. Ireland may not be famed for its mountains, but they are beautiful. They more or less surround the central flatlands like a ring. The highest mountain in Ireland is just 1,041 meters tall. Most of the others are between 600 and 900 meters. At higher elevations, the flora and fauna are different. In Glen Veigh National Park, there are stretches of ancient natural woodlands. Much of Ireland must have looked like this before settlers began to clear the land to farm. The forest here is managed. Non-native species of plants have to be kept in check, otherwise they would take over. The denser areas of woodland are rich in plants adapted to moist, shady conditions. Mosses thrive here. Elsewhere, the mountain landscape is bleak. Stumps of old pine trees, preserved in the bog, indicate that this area was once covered in forest. Donegal is the northernmost county in Ireland. It's remote, rugged, and windy. But here too, people and animals have adapted to the environment. Sean Burren owns part of Slieve League Mountain right beside the Atlantic. Its sheer cliffs are famous. For generations, the Burren family have been sheep farmers on the side of the mountain facing inland. Sean Burren has about 400 mountain sheep, well adapted to the rough terrain and rough weather. He loves life in this magnificent landscape.
I'm happy. I love this game. I would stay 7 days a week on the mountain. When we were that size, we were in the mountain with my father. Yeah, he was in the mountain every day. I would die in Dublin, you know. 1 or 2 days is enough in the big cities. You know, even I don't go in holidays. I would prefer I would love to go around Scotland It would be much the same as Ireland, you know. But these big cities, no, I don't like them, no. No, I like to be out and about. Yeah. Yeah.
The sheep stay out on the mountain even in winter. Their thick coat protects them from the wind and the rain. Their wool is too coarse and scratchy to make clothes with. It's used instead for carpets and insulation. Traditional Irish sweaters are nowadays made with soft lamb's wool from New Zealand. Sean Burns' sheep are, however, very good to eat, at least the young ones. He sells his lambs to gourmet establishments in France. The meat tastes wonderful. But that's not all too surprising, given the lamb's excellent diet and healthy life here in the wilds of Ireland.
The sheep on this mountain here they eat this kind of grasses here, this kind of grass, you know, and they eat some of the heather. It's a different type of heather, you know, and it's full of iron, you know, so that's what the sheep graze on this mountain. And they eat the brown grass as well, you know, the different types of it. They have to eat that because the ground stops growing, and the sheep has to eat for all this that's left over the summer. They pick the good stuff in the summer, and then they take this in the winter. They have to eat it.
The sheep may be robust and self-sufficient, but Sean Byrne does help them get through the rainy season. Before it starts in October, he gathers in his sheep and subjects them to a prophylactic treatment. Because their wool will remain damp for months, it makes a perfect home and breeding ground for all kinds of parasites: blowflies, lice, ticks and mites. The mites cause a nasty disease called sheep scab. The lesions are painful and the disease spreads fast through a flock. It also destroys the wool, as does blowfly strike. Farmers across Ireland use dips to protect their sheep. Each sheep is dunked in a brew of chemicals.
The technique of dipping is that it protects their coat and it protects their skin. You know, when you're on a mountain, you get heather ticks, and if you have them dipped, that goes into their skin. So when they're dipped, that protects them. And then there's such thing as a lice, could come on sheep if you don't have them dipped, and scab. So with the rain and everything going down through their coat, if they're not protected, there'll come a scab on them as a skin disease. So the dip clears that.
It's a long day's work, bathing every member of the flock, but it's certainly worth the effort. The sheep are now ready to face the winter. One of the bleakest, roughest areas in Ireland is in the northwest of County Clare. It's called the Burren. Much of it looks like the moon. It's one of the largest karst landscapes in Europe. the limestone formed as sediments in a sea here 350 million years ago. Parts of the Burren were wrinkled by tectonic action, and 2 periods of glaciation have left their mark, as has erosion. It's hard to imagine that there could be life in this wasteland of seemingly barren rock. Yet wherever you look, especially in summer, there are plants. 3/4 of the 1,400 species found in Ireland are represented in the Burren. Here too, the key is water. Rainwater trickles down through the limestone into a network of caves and subterranean rivers. And springs deliver the water back to the surface. Sometimes karst lakes appear overnight and disappear again. They're called turlers. When it rains, the moonscape is transformed into a blossoming garden. Arctic, alpine, and Mediterranean plants all grow in the Burren. Orchids, ferns, bird's foot trefoil, gentian, red robin, thyme, peppermint, burnet roses. An amazing abundance of plants grows here, defying the wind and the rocks. Animals, by contrast, are rare, though there are flocks of feral goats, domestic goats that have run wild, about 1,000 in all. They live unmolested and at peace in the Burren National Park. Back again to County Sligo and Prannie Rhatigan's kitchen. The scones are ready. The other dishes will also feature a range of seaweeds, harvested just hours earlier on the rocky shore behind the house. Sea lettuce, sea spaghetti and bladderwrack. People ate seaweed in Ireland in the mid-19th century during the Great Famine that resulted from the failure of the potato crop. But Prannie says it makes sense to eat it nowadays as well.
Those beetroot turned out fantastic. There's definitely back to the roots, yeah, back to the land, you know, from farm to fork and so on, and many other schemes and plans and organisations, and even more so the trend to actually grow your own food. And that's a wonderful thing to happen. And as part of that, I think seaweeds are coming in on that crest of the wave, if you like, of people getting back to nature, going out and doing wild harvesting.
Bright green sea lettuce, vinaigrette dressing and beetroot make a tasty salad. The seaweed tastes salty. It's full of calcium, magnesium and vitamin B.
Excellent.
The salad is very healthy and easy to make.
We'll pop it into...
Johnny is making a stew of beef and vegetables and sea spaghetti. It has a delicate flavour, sometimes compared to that of clams, and it's rich in iron and vitamin C.
Smaller bits now. Maybe...
Prannie makes another salad with strips of raw sea spaghetti and carrot with a peppery garlic dressing.
Okay, so pop the rest onto that.
So one vegetable in the salad comes from the garden and the other from the sea.
Over. So we'll put the stew beside you. I feel that it's a really neglected vegetable. It needs somebody to actually get that message out there. And if that somebody is me, then so be it. I'd love to see seaweeds on the menus in many, many restaurants. And I'd love to see them available in supermarkets. And in Ireland in particular, I'd love to see children going off to school with a little pack of maybe the Dulisk crisps in their pocket, like they did in the 1920s in Ireland. Who knows, we could become like the Japanese eventually, loving our seaweeds.
Prannie Rhatigan and her family are more enthusiastic about seaweed than most other Irish people are. But in times of economic hardship, seaweed is an abundant resource that's attracting greater attention. Perhaps it will soon be making an appearance on dining tables across the country.
Okay. Easily known, you love them, that's why you make a good effort at cooking them.
Though much of Ireland looks harsh and bleak, its varied habitats are rich in natural treasures. You just have to look closely and sometimes leave the beaten path to find them.